Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Briefly, this is my last 24 hours. I started getting sick last night. Still wasn't feeling great this morning, but well enough to run my D&D game, then come home and record. What I forgot was daylight savings time moved up the Banzuke release for me, so I sat here for close to an hour waiting for the Banzuke to come out for no reason. Then I saw the Banzuke, and being late to the party became the highlight of my day. See this right here? This is what we call the idiot's rainbow, and I am the idiot. So let's break down the first Banzuke of 2026 and see if I can get to the end without an outtake where I accidentally fire snot all over the pop filter. As we've been saying, Hoshoryu and Onosato have swapped spots. Hoshoryu was west, moves to east, Onosato the opposite. Yokozuna and Ozeki, they get ordered up by the number of wins they had the previous basho. Onosato had fewer than Hoshoryu, he goes behind Hoshoryu. The exception, of course, is if there's a new person at one of these ranks. Aonishiki, he goes from Sekiwake to Ozeki, so even though he had 12 wins to Kotozakura's 8, Kotozakura remains ahead because he was already in position. If Aonishiki gets more wins than Koto this time, then he'll be Ozeki when East in March. As expected, Kirishima's 11 wins from Mid-Maegashira to East gets him up to the highest Sekiwake slot. Takayasu, his 8 wins from right at Komusubi 1 West, just gets him up to Sekiwake 1 West. Oho, he was Sekiwake 1 West, went 7 and 8. There was no one to really push him down farther than Komusubi 1 East, so there he goes. Wakamoto Haru, he had his 8 wins down here at 2 West, mathematically just up to 1 West, but there was no one better. Ichi Yamamoto was at Mid-Maegashira 8, so he was not considered a better option, so Waka goes up to Komusubi 1 West, and there we have our Sanyaku, pretty easy. The top of Mid-Maegashira was pretty straightforward as well. Ichi Yamamoto, he was mathematically ahead of Yoshino Fuji. He was +7 with his 11 wins. Yoshino Fuji was 9 and 6. This was actually an extra half-rank promotion for him, so they kept him in order. Like I figured, Ura, he and Waka Takakage were tied over here, but Ura had more wins, so he got the tiebreaker. He goes from 3 West up to 2 East. Waka Takakage drops from 1 West down to 2 West. Everything's fine, everything's cool. Takano Sho and Hakuno Fuji. Hakuno Fuji, ex Hakuoho. Look, when Yoshino Fuji changed his name, some people came to me afterwards and were like, yeah, that actually got reported a little bit ago. You know, Chris Sumo had it, some other places had it, and I think I had seen it and I just forgot. I haven't seen this anywhere, and I feel confident this wasn't reported, unless there was something very recently that I just didn't see. I am positive I haven't seen this yet. I don't know what Izagahama's issue is where they just got to keep doing these changes. Like, guys, the names are fine. Not everybody has to be a Fuji. It's okay. Anyway, that's not the point. Takano Sho and Hakuno Fuji were going to be Maegashira 3 in one order or the other. I initially thought Takano Sho would be ahead. I switched them up because it just made more sense. Well, that was a mistake. I should have left them the way they were. But this is fine. Takano Sho coming down from Komusubi, Hakuno Fuji. Oh god, how many times am I going to make that mistake? In theory, he earned a higher slot, but when you come down from Komusubi, you get treated a little bit better. That's what happens here. Totally normal. Everything's fine. Now, with Tamawashi, Daisho, and Atami Fuji, I am a little surprised here. Now, there were people I saw, people who know this stuff really well, who had Tamawashi either at 4 West, which I could kinda see, or at 5 East, and the 5 East one really surprised me, because as other people pointed out, and which I did not point out explicitly in the Guess the Banzuke video, with the expansion of the Sanyaku, the effective drop is actually an extra half a rank. So Tamawashi, when there were 7 guys in the Sanyaku, Tamawashi was 4 East, so he was number 14 in line. With 8 in the Sanyaku, then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now he's number 9, plus 8 is 17. He went from 14 to 17, that's 3 slots. There's not been hard evidence that they take this into account, but there has been suggestions that they do think about this, especially when guys are higher up, which is why I thought it was really unlikely he was going to drop all the way to 5 East behind these 2 guys, especially with Daisho coming up from Mid-Maegashira 10. But hey, the people who said Tamawashi was going to drop to 5 East, they were right. It was always possible. I'm a little surprised by this, but whatever, it is what it is. Now, part of the reason I'm surprised by this is that they then proceeded to put Hiraumi and Oshoma here and here. Hiraumi was 4 and 11 just up here, right, at Mid-Maegashira 3. So he's 4 and 11. So he that's minus 7 ranks, but he only actually goes down minus 3. That's a very minimal drop. But the only person who could take the spot instead of him was Fujinokawa, who was 9 and 6 at Maegashira 12 East. If he had gone all the way up to here, which is what I predicted, and I knew it was a little chancy, but I went with it, that would have been plus 6. And we've seen recently that there's a limit to how much they're willing to push up guys with winning records from those mid to low ranks. So I knew putting Fuji ahead of Hiraumi might not work out. But if that was the case, wait, why did they put Hiraumi ahead of Fujinokawa? And not only that, why did they put Oshoma ahead of Fujinokawa, but drop Tamawashi back behind these guys? That's what I don't understand. Behind Atami Fuji, I can kind of understand because he was Maegashira 6. He had a Sanyaku match. He was pretty close to the Joy guys. That's okay. But Daisho was 10. So if we come over here to the guest, the Banzuke helper, Fujinokawa, I had him going up plus 6. That was more than they wanted to do. He ended up at here, and he was plus 4.5. Now, if we make the ink a little thicker and easier to read, so Hiraumi ended up here. So instead of minus 4, he went down minus 3. Oshoma, he ended up here at 7E. So instead of minus 3.5, he only went down 2.5 with 4 and 11 records. That's supposed to be minus 7, remember. Tamawashi was 7 and 8, but he got dinked down to 5 East, so he took that rank of demotion. I don't really get what the theory here is, because if you want to look at it another way, Oshoma 4 and 11, Maegashira 4 West. Okay, so minus 7, so that puts him at mathematically Maegashira 11 West. Fujinokawa, he was 12 East, so 9 and 6 puts him at Maegashira 9 East. So if you put Oshoma here and Fuji over here, that means you are moving a guy up who was 2.5 ranks. Fujinokawa, Maegashira 9 East, Oshoma, Maegashira 11 West. That's 2.5 ranks, and they still put Oshoma ahead of him. But Tamawashi and Daisho and Atami Fuji were tied. Mathematically, they were all tied. Why does Tamawashi lose that tiebreaker, but Oshoma gets pushed ahead of Fujinokawa? The only explanation, and I mean this has to be what it is that Daisho was only going up 5.5 ranks. So that's whatever. He moved over to 4 East, that's 6 ranks. On 10 and 5, that's not a big over promotion. Atami Fuji, you move him up to here, that's 1.5 ranks. That's not a big over promotion. Fujinokawa, even here at plus 4.5, that's a decent over promotion, and it seems like they didn't want to give him more than that. So we see well, I don't know if I'd say we see logic, but we see a rationale. This is something they can point to and say, well, this is why we did this. But for all the instances where they have taken guys who were in the Joy, the top 16, who had those more difficult schedules, and moved them up a little bit because they had the hard schedule and you want to show respect to that, this is a lot. I grant that there's not a lot of instances where you've got a guy who was 9 and 6 and can go up, 5.5, 6 ranks, something like that. So there's not a lot to look back on and say, well, what do they do in these situations? And as such, I guess maybe we're learning something about the way they want to handle stuff like this in the future. But man, this feels really bad for Fuji. I can kind of understand if they look at how he's performed and be like, man, Maegashira 6 seems high for him. But really, let's just think about putting him at 7 East. Has Oshoma really earned his spot ahead of Fujinokawa? It doesn't feel like it, does it? He gets into those higher ranks and gets absolutely murdered. He does fine in the mid ranks, but why not give Fuji that little bit of a boost, let him go up, and just see how he does at a slightly higher rank? There's nothing wrong with that. Why not do that? But maybe that's the problem. I try to predict these things, and maybe I'm leaning a little too much into what I think should happen, and I'm ignoring the evidence for what they're actually going to do. It's possible, in which case, my bad. And we haven't started talking about Shodai yet. Okay, Tamawashi, he got his -1. In a vacuum, okay. That compared to Hiraumi only going down the 3 ranks, Oshoma only the -2.5. Fuji, yes, a good over promotion, but kind of getting pushed down as low as he reasonably can. Again, there's a rationale. I don't know if I like it, but I need to pay attention to it for these predictions. If you are not about predicting the Banzuke, then just understand that this does make a kind of sense. You may think it's fine, you may think this looks good, you may not, but there is a reasoning to this that does at least somewhat align with what they've done in the past. Shodai, though, man, I don't know. So Shodai was 4 and 11 at Maegashira 5 West. Ichi Yamamoto did the exact same thing in September and got moved down to Maegashira 8 East in November. Now, I ended up guessing Shodai being way down at Maegashira 12, which was wrong, but even initially I had him down at 10 East because the 4 and 11 for Ichi Yamamoto, that little tiny demotion, was very much a situation where there weren't any other options. It was either he goes down that little bit or Tobizaru goes up a ton. It was two bad choices, they had to go with one of them. In this case, if Gonoyama, so he was 13 East, right? He was Maegashira 13 East, he was 9 and 6. So to put him here is +4. Now, they're not going to push Kinbozan out of the way, so that would be plus 4.5. Put him up +5 to Maegashira 8 East, and that's really not that bad. Like, they've done this before, and they haven't really hesitated to do this before. It's not one of those things that only happens when there's absolutely no other choice. They do it when it looks like the best option. For Shodai, who did not have a Joy schedule, he had a couple Sanyaku matches, but those guys were doing poorly, which is the only reason those matches happened in the first place. For him to only go down 2.5, if he goes down one more rank, just one more rank to here, that's minus 3.5 ranks on a 4 and 11 record. That's still super friendly. That's still fine. But I suppose, so if Gonoyama was 13 East and he was 9 and 6, then mathematically he should be at Maegashira 10 East. If Shodai was 5 West and 4 and 11, then he would mathematically go to Maegashira 12 West. That's a 2.5 rank gap. It's the same thing as Fujinokawa and Oshoma. So if you're going to put Oshoma ahead of Fujinokawa and you're going to treat Shodai as being in the Joy, I guess, even though he wasn't and his schedule wasn't nearly as hard, then I guess it makes sense to put Shodai in front of Gonoyama. But really, neither of those makes a lot of sense. Again, they have a rationale. This is the rationale that they're using. This is the line of thought that they're using. Because I refuse to believe, I mean, we joke about they get drunk and just make decisions. I refuse to believe that they're not trying to use some sort of logic for this. It may seem really weird from the outside looking in, but they're still thinking like, okay, for this reason, let's do X, Y, or Z. And if you're trying to understand what the X, Y, or Z is, well, here you go. They didn't want Fujinokawa or Gonoyama to go up any more than they are going up right here. And they were willing to ultra minimize the demotions of Oshoma and Shodai to make it happen. But if you're sort of new to the sport, just be aware that this is not the kind of decision they would have made in even the recent past. They would have let the guys in Fuji and Gonoyama's position go up a little bit further and let Oshoma and Shodai and maybe even Hiraumi drop down a little bit further. But again, there's not a lot of situations where you've got 9 and 6 guys who are capable of going up that far, so it's not like they're held in place by some ancient precedent. If there was a few times where they did something different in the past and they decided they're going to do it this way now, okay, cool. That's what it is, I guess. We just need to learn. I just need to learn. Remember, this is the Idiot's Rainbow. Getting down a little bit further, Roga, him ending up at 9 West, this is +2 with an 8 and 7 record. So that's fine. I thought he was going to end up at 9 East just because I thought Shodai would end up further back. With Shodai coming up to here, then Roga coming back here, that's fine. That makes sense. Roga just ended up where the other movements pushed him. Similarly, I thought Toki Hayate was going to be here at 9 West. He ended up at 10 East. Shodai getting moved up pushed him back. That's fine. Kota Shoho, like, he was always going to end up here, just like Kinbozan was always going to end up here. Mathematically, all these guys around him were way lower, but they ended up 7 and 8, so they were just going to stay in place. Chiyoshoma, Nishiki Fuji, and Midori Fuji. Well, I guess if I want to take some solace in my idiocy, I got that order correct. They did put Chiyoshoma ahead, then Nishiki Fuji, then Midori Fuji. They went in the order of who had the most wins. I just figured they would end up a little bit higher. I was wrong. Okay, my bad. Similarly, Abi and Tobizaru, this was always a coin flip. I thought Abi was going to go behind. They put Tobizaru behind. It is what it is. They could have gone either way with this. Again, the weird thing here is that they were tied with Shodai, and Shodai is 4.5 ranks ahead of them. This is another reason that you know that it was really about they don't want to move. Let me scroll this down a little bit. It was really about they don't want to move Fujinokawa and Gonoyama any higher than this, because Shodai should have been down here. But if they're like, we're not putting these guys any higher, then someone has to go in this spot, and Shodai was probably the only one that they thought was worth pushing that high. Like, Roga, okay, he was 8 and 7 at 11 West, so mathematically he was at 10 West, but he was also behind Gonoyama. So they're gonna keep him behind Gonoyama. Gonoyama is the key here. Fujinokawa and Gonoyama are the ones whose movement dictates everything else. Again, it is simply the extent of the limitation placed on where they can get promoted that, to me, was a bit of a surprise. And now for the bottom. So Tomokaze, Shishi, Mitakeumi, Ryuden, that was always going to be like how they lined up. There wasn't really any options. Hatsuyama at the bottom, same thing. Now, some people pointed out, like, what about Asakoryu? Because I had Asanoyama here, and eventually I moved Asakoryu to 16 East. And they're like, well, Asakoryu was in Makuuchi and had a winning record. What about putting him ahead of everybody coming up from Juryo? Because we've seen that happen in the past. And that was true. The reason I didn't go with that was because, generally speaking, that has involved guys from Juryo coming up to like Maegashira 13, Maegashira 14. The committee has tended to not want to elevate guys coming up from Juryo past Maegashira 13 for a little while. So in those cases, okay, then you take those guys who are winning in the division and put them ahead of the Juryo guys. In this case, being all the way down at 15 and 16, I just thought they weren't going to feel as compelled to push Asakoryu ahead of Asanoyama, and I was wrong. That was incorrect. Okay, cool. I learned for next time. This was definitely surprising though. Oshiumi and Asahakuryu, like, Oshiumi was 7 and 8. He goes down a rank. And like I mentioned, with the Sanyaku getting bigger, all the demotions are technically a little bit larger than they normally would be. But at this point in the division, I really don't think that matters. I think this is a decision they made just to push the guy coming up from Juryo a little bit back. And if they're gonna make Asanoyama only go to 16 East, making Asahakuryu only go to 17 East actually is kind of logical. It keeps their movement sort of in line with each other. Oshiumi getting the under demotion could just be out of respect for him going off and winning 5 in a row at the end of November, or it could just be because that's where he ended up when they did what they decided to do with the Juryo guys. I don't know. That's why the decisions that involve the Juryo guys are really hit and miss a lot of the time. It's not illogical. It's not even that surprising in retrospect. It's just not what I expected beforehand. Okay, that's the Banzuke breakdown for January 2026. I realize that probably went a little bit off the rails. I could feel it going off the rails in my head as I was talking. I thought about re-recording it, and then my voice said, no, you can go f*** yourself. So we're just going to leave it as it is. Since we have the extra week before the Basho, the tier list is not going to come out right away. I'll put it out next week, so like a week and a half before the tournament when it usually goes out. But I will put up the form so you can put in your picks as soon as possible. Look for that probably on Monday. Other than that, I need to stop talking, so have a great day and I'll see you soon.